we're kind of in this really interesting, exciting time in our life cycle. We built the business from traditionally like aged chemistry, right? And we would try to breathe new life into those chemistries, extend the life cycle of those chemistries, and kind of reinvent the typical product life cycle, right? But now we're at a point in time where all that business is incredibly important to us, and it will continue to be. But now we have opportunities where we're bringing new chemistries to market. We have partnerships with Japanese discovery companies, some of the majors, on bringing new chemistries to market, which takes a little bit different of a mindset, right? So you're taking, a team who's been pushing or breathing new life into more mature products, we'll call them, to now kind of a more innovative mindset in working with, folks in the field that are more innovative, like-minded, kind of early adopters type. So it's just an interesting time in where we're at, I guess.
I think that's interesting. I mean, especially if you look at kind of Gowan's position in the market, I think, one of the things you've seen, especially in Western Canada and southern Saskatchewan, the southern prairies, the lentil areas, is that, all of those old chemistries in terms of, Edge and Avidax, certainly, and ultimately into Fortress and even Treflan and all that kind of stuff, those are making a big resurgence.
Yeah.
It felt like a long time those were kind of going away. Well, at the same time, we were massively overusing group 1s and group 2s and everything else, and now, it feels like, everybody is talking about, well, we need to go back and it's a really nice fit in terms of varying your chemistry mix to kind of get away from what we've been overusing. And I think it's interesting to see that you're going to be, it's going to be interesting to see what comes forward from what you're saying on the innovation or inventive side, depending on what word you want to use.
Varying your chemistries, I think, was one of the points that you made.
Yeah.
We got to be careful not to fall back into the same trap all over again, right?
Like, I know.
Our message is, use what you have at your disposal currently, because the regulatory environment is not going to get any easier. So managing chemistries, managing rotations, both crop and chemistry rotations. We tell our folks that we work with, right? We don't want our products to touch every acre on your farm, right? We want to touch a quarter of your farm and then rotate that quarter next year, right? We got to extend the life of the tools that we have at our disposal today, and that's it's always been our message, and it'll continue to be our message moving forward. We believe in keeping all tools available to Canadian growers, right? And to do that, you have to have an effective management program, right? And so while some organizations, they want to cover a lot of acres, right? And the message that we communicate is that we don't want you to use our products on every acre of your farm, right? Because we know what happens when that happens. When you do it year over year, not only are you creating an issue for next year, but it's creating an issue for the next generation, right? And that can be significant, especially as we continue to run out of effective tools across the industry. So yeah, it is a significant problem that our business is built on, and that is weed resistance, and our older chemistries making a comeback. But I think the important takeaway is that we want to be a part of the solution, right? We don't want to be the solution on any person's farm. We just want to be a part of it, and I think that's what kind of sets us apart as an organization. So we have new chemistry, new mixtures with some of our older chemistries, right? So we're looking to bring a triolate ethylfluorine combo product to market, which will serve a unique need. We're going to be looking to bring essentially what we're calling like a liquid Fortress product. So right now we just have the Fortress Microactive, but we're working on a liquid version of that. So a lot of our development efforts are focused on Western Canadian ag.
What do you see the next 5 to 10 years looking like in kind of, the Western Canadian market? Like you briefly mentioned, a pre-seed chemistry that's coming out. What do you think the next decade looks like in terms of, new innovation from Gowan or from the, in the ag sector in general?
Yeah. So I'll be honest, Levi, like I don't see a ton of innovation out there, right? Like we're lucky to be bringing one of them to market.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot. So that's why I think the management of the available tools is going to be really the key to being successful in the next decade. I do think as the problem continues to spread, not only in Western Canada in terms of weed resistance, but in all other parts of the world, I think we will start to see some additional tools come to market. But as you guys all know, the process to bring new chemistry to market is incredibly expensive and incredibly time consuming. But what's in current pipelines, from what I see, there's not going to be a ton of new, brand new tools. I think you'll see a lot of mixtures, a lot of multiple modes of actions to reduce that selection pressure coming out. But I think that's going to be the strategy for the next decade, pretty broadly.
You obviously have some products that are the microactive versus some that are the, ECEs or liquid formulations, right? Do you see a real difference in demand for those based on, like, obviously the weed resistance is one thing, but do you think that there's also a impact of generally dry conditions versus generally wet conditions? And like the reason I ask is, this year you had this incredible drought in a large part of the prairies, like both the plants you were trying to grow, but the plants you weren't trying to grow in your field or the weeds, they didn't respond very well to herbicide treatments in season. And I think it was just the plants were dry, the plants were, weren't, they weren't as robust as they would normally be. So it wasn't a big problem, but at the same time, they just were, they were dry, and I think they were sort of half shut down. One of the nice things about some of those microactives in the pre-emergent is you generally do get enough snow at least to activate those in a dry year. Like, is that something that's like actually, is that just a wild theory of mine, or is that actually something that would bear itself out in what?
No, yeah, absolutely. So a lot of these pre-emergent products require more moisture for effective activation, right? You always get some level of activation with whatever moisture you have. The good thing is with some of our microactive products, it typically takes less moisture than some of the other pre-emergent products out there. But there's absolutely, your theory is sound. It does take moisture. The more moisture we get, the more active ingredient we get off of the granule. So it actually moves off of the granule into the surrounding soil. And without that, it's difficult. It absolutely needs it, and it's less effective without it, no doubt about it.
So you talked a little bit, obviously, there about the regulatory environment, and with, obviously a background in the US and then in Canada. Can you kind of just talk a little bit about what you see in the regulatory space a bit, and then maybe compare it a little bit to the regulatory space in the US as well?
Yeah, and we might as well throw in the EU while we're at it.
Sure.
So like our biggest concern is maintaining a science-based approach, right? It appears in other parts of the world that maybe some public perceptions are driving regulatory paths, which is scary for us, right? Like as you guys know, there's so much work, so much science that goes into ensuring the products that we put out to the market are safe for consumers when used as directed. I mean, that's really what it boils down to, right? Very similar, a lot of similarities though in the US and Canada. I would say some of the little nuance differences are when we head into an election cycle, for example, how everything just slams shut, right? Which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, because that kind of removes the politicalization of regulatory decisions. So I think that's okay, but we don't really see that in the US. But yeah, in general, the processes, timelines are a little extended in Canada relative to the US, which again, I don't think is a bad thing. I think performing more, not saying the US doesn't perform due diligence, but taking your time on some of these decisions, I don't think is a bad thing. But yeah, other than that, it's very, very similar. My biggest struggle was learning the language, right? So it's basically the same process, but it's a different term for everything, right? So, sitting with our regulatory and development team and talking through things, it's a bit of a learning curve on the front end. I knew what they were talking about. I just didn't know, I would always refer to the US verbiage. So that was a bit of a challenge up front. But other than that, processes are very similar. It seems like it's a very collaborative approach, right? Starting from the pre-consultation conversation with the PMRA, very open and honest, what some initial expectations are, and the EPA is the same way.